Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. Dusk on Arden Nines. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Mason Riley's first spotted her. On the edge of his cornfield, where the tall amber stalks met the cracked dirt path, a figure moved with unnatural grace, lining, stooped, and urgent. Mason paused, his calloused hands still gripping the handle of his old hoe as he narrowed his eyes against the fading light. The shape was slender, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, carrying something small and precious against its chest. Mason's heart thudded. Marauders and scavengers were common since the crops began to fail, but few dared approach a private homestead. Fewer still brought an infant into their desperate flight. First encounter. Mason dropped his tool and stepped forward, boots crunching dry earth. The figure froze, lifting a pale face framed by silver-streaked hair that seemed almost luminescent in the dusk. Beneath her arm, a tiny being trembled, skin tinted a soft violet, hair the color of moonlight, eyes too large for her small face. Mason's breath caught. This was no wild scavenger. This was an alien mother, terrified, stealing from his supplies to feed her baby. Anger flared hot in his chest. Yet as he drew closer, he saw her wound, a deep gash on her leg, bound with ragged cloth stained brown with old blood. A desperate plea. The mother's voice was a hoarse whisper. Please, she rasped, accent thick and musical. My child's life depends on this. Her eyes flicked to the scattered grain and root bins behind Mason, then back to him. The infant whimpered. Mason felt his defenses waver. Humanity's borders had hardened over the last decade, any alien incursion punishable by confinement or worse. But here before him was a creature driven by love and fear, not conquest. Still, protocol demanded he drive her away. He swallowed hard, stepping between her and the supply shed. You can't stay, he said quietly. This is my land. The mother shook her head, struggling to stand. I have nowhere else. Her gaze found his pleading, exhausted, utterly human. Crossing the line. Mason hesitated. Every instinct screamed to raise the alarm, call the patrol drones, let them deal with this intruder. But another voice whispered inside him, the memory of his daughter's laughter, long silenced by sickness. He remembered the nights he'd held her, fearful she'd slip away. Guilt coiled around his ribs. Without fully realizing it, he reached out, sliding one arm beneath the mother's shoulders, the other under her knees. She went limp and he braced himself for her weight, lighter than he expected. Returning her small form to his arms, he turned toward his cabin, no longer certain of his plan but propelled by a sudden fierce compassion. Refuge within simple walls. The cabin's single solar lamp flickered to life as Mason laid the mother on a narrow cot. The infant, now unsettled, clung to her mother's shawl, tiny fingers gripping. Mason backed away, hands open. I won't lock you up, he said. You'll have shelter until you heal. The mother closed her eyes, pain etched across her brow. They will find us, she murmured. They always do. Mason knelt, placing fresh water and a bowl of steamed tubers and soft grain cakes on a chipped table beside them. The baby's eyes fixed on the food, hunger raw and immediate. Mason wished he could feed them both, but he'd need to earn their trust first. Tending wounds and fears. By the dim lamp, Mason worked to clean the alien's wound. Her skin was cooler than his, almost glass-like in texture. He poured warm water over the ragged cloth, winced at the mother's soft groan. The baby reached out, brushing her mother's hair aside to peer at Mason's hands. Mason paused his ministrations and offered the infant a small grain cake. After a moment's hesitation, the baby accepted, chewing deliberately as if measuring every crumb. Mason breathed easier. The mother opened one eye. Thank you, she whispered, voice brittle with relief. Mason met her gaze. What's your name? She closed her eyes again, exhaustion winning. Corin, my daughter is Lyra. Mason tucked a blanket around her and stood. Rest, I'll bring more food for both of you. Night's uneasy peace. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin's shutters, dust swirling in the fatting heat. Inside, Corin and Lyra slept, Corin's chest rising in shallow rhythm, Lyra curled beside her like a living amulet. Mason stared at the two of them, the weight of his choice settling over him like a storm cloud. Tomorrow he'd face questions, neighbors would notice extra food gone, the patrol drones might scan the area for unauthorized life forms. But tonight he would honor this fragile truce between human and alien. He crossed the room and closed the curtain, shutting out the world beyond his doorstep. Dawn's first light. The next morning, Mason rose before the sun, his mind restless. He prepared a simple breakfast, soft cakes smeared with sweet root jam, boiled greens lightly salted. Corin roused as he carried the tray in. Her wound seemed less angry, the swelling receding. Lyra blinked awake, violet eyes tracking Mason. Corin sat up, bracing herself on one arm. Mason set the tray on the cot's edge. Eat, he said gently. Corin studied the food as if tasting flavors through memory. She broke off a piece of cake and offered it to Lyra, who accepted without hesitation. Corin then ate small bites that grew more confident as hunger eased. Mason leaned against the wall, relief mingling with worry. He needed a plan how to keep them safe, how to help them leave. But in this quiet moment, the simple act of shared food felt like victory enough. The dawn light seeped through the gaps in the cabin walls, painting soft lines across the dusty floorboards. Mason stirred on the cot, muscles stiff from a restless night. Beside him, Corin remained still, her breathing shallow and measured. Lyra lay curled at Corin's feet, clutching the carved talisman. Mason sat up slowly, careful not to jostle the fragile piece that held them together. Outside, the wind whispered through the dying cornfields, carrying with it the faint hum of distant patrol drones. His heart tightened. Last night's refuge felt tenuous now, as though the walls themselves might betray them at any moment. Mason rose and crossed to the basin in the corner. He splashed cool water on his face, wincing at the raw ache in his joints. The world beyond these walls demanded vigilance. There would be no rest today. He dried his hands on a faded towel and glanced back at Corin, whose eyes were still closed. Her face was pale but peaceful. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. She needed more than food. She needed a plan to escape the eyes that sought to capture her. He turned to the small table where he had set yesterday's unclaimed rations. Dried grain cakes, tubers, and herbal infusions. He poured hot water into a chipped mug and stirred the grain with care, then lifted the steam to his lips before carrying the warm porridge to Corin's side. "Corin," he murmured, voice low. She cracked one eye open, gaze unfocused. Mason knelt and offered the spoon. "You need to eat." Corin's lips parted, and she took a timid bite, chewing as though tasting trust itself. Lyra stirred, sliding from the floor to sit on the edge of the cot beside her mother. Mason handed the child a small piece of bread, and she accepted it gratefully, tiny hands tearing crust with purpose. Mason watched them eat, thinking of his own daughter's first bites of porridge long ago. Grief twisted inside him, but he pushed it down. There was no room for sorrow here, only urgency. After Corin finished, Mason helped her sit up. He produced a fresh cloth and antiseptic salve from his satchel and began to redress her wound. Corin winced but did not protest. Her silent acceptance only deepened Mason's resolve to shield them from harm. He wrapped the bandage snugly, then tucked her leg beneath a faded blanket. Corin's eyes met his. "We cannot stay," she whispered. Mason nodded. "I know." He stood and patted Lyra's head. "We leave once you're steady." Lyra looked between them, violet eyes wide. Mason smiled gently. "We'll go at first light." Corin closed her eyes as though holding onto the promise of movement. The sky beyond the cabin was shifting from gray to pale gold. Mason gathered his leather satchel and slung it over one shoulder, then folded his coat around Corin's shoulders. He guided her to her feet, steadying her as she leaned on his arm. Lyra stepped in front, lifting her small pack. Mason scooped her into his arms. Together, they slipped out the door into the crisp morning air. They crossed the small yard where footprints from last night still lay imprinted in the dusty soil. Mason's gaze darted to the fence line and the dark tree line beyond, where anyone could be watching. He led them through a gap in the fence and onto the dirt road that wound past his property. No one was in sight, but he felt eyes on his back. Every snap of dried twig set his pulse racing. Corin gripped his arm, determined despite pain. Mason admired her resolve. She faced each new dawn with quiet courage. As they rounded the corner of his plot, Mason paused. A faint whir sounded overhead, one of the patrol drones again. He crouched, shielding Corin and Lyra against a low stone wall. Above them, the drone's searchlight swept, its beam cutting through haze. Mason held his breath until the light passed, then led them onward. "They're closer today," he said when they reached the shelter of a grove of scorched oaks. Corin nodded, jaw set. Lyra pressed her face against Corin's leg, small body trembling. Mason produced a tattered map, unfolding it on a flat rock. The map traced routes through wild scrubland to a distant oasis where water ran clear and patrols grew sparse. "We follow this path," he said, pointing to a narrow line that snaked eastward. Corin leaned in, reading the annotations. "The terrain becomes rocky after the riverbed," she noted. Mason fingered the river's bend. "We'll refill water there." Lyra traced her finger along the map, voice soft. "Mama will be safe." Corin laid a hand on Lyra's hair. "That is why we endure," she said, voice steady. They set off, moving through the oak grove into open scrub. The land was hostile. Brittle grass scraped their shins, thorn bushes caught at their clothes, and the sun climbed higher, baking their backs. Mason paused to remove his coat and share water from the canteen. Corin sipped gratefully, then offered water to Mason and Lyra. The simple ritual of sharing eased their weariness. Mason thought of the ration station they had visited, the derelict supply depot where officials had scanned Corin's face with suspicion. He pushed down anger at their distrust. There was no room for that now. By midday, they reached the dried riverbed. Stones lined its path like scattered bones, and the earth crumbled underfoot. Mason knelt and scooped his hands into a shallow pool of muddy water. He offered it to Corin, who hesitated, then sipped slowly. Lyra, ever fearless, cupped her small hands and drank with gusto. Corin studied the pool's surface. Visions, she whispered. She placed her hand on the water, murmuring words in her native tongue. The ripples shimmered violet, and for a breath, Mason thought he saw shapes, distant white towers, green fields, people standing shoulder to shoulder. Then the ripples stilled. Corin's eyes glowed with hope. "The oasis," she said. Mason rose, gripping Lyra's shoulder. "Then we press on." They followed the riverbed eastward, each step stirring dust. Shadows lengthened as the sun tilted west. Mason scanned the horizon. The oasis would appear beyond rolling hills, but patrol drones scoured the flatlands below. He veered toward a rocky ridge for cover, leading Corin and Lyra along its shadowed side. Corin grimaced as her bandaged leg struck a jagged stone. Mason froze. "Are you all right?" he whispered. Corin nodded, teeth clenched. Mason knelt, brushing dust from her wound. Pain flickered in her eyes, but she refused help. Mason bit back his frustration. She would not let him carry her until the last moment. He helped her to her feet, and they continued, slower now but determined. As evening settled, they crested the final hill. Before them spread a verdant valley, the oasis gleaming like an emerald eye. White stone ruins dotted its edges, and verdant trees clustered around a crystalline lake. Mason's chest tightened. Salvation lay within sight, but so did danger. Patrol drones had shifted pattern this afternoon, surveying the valley's approaches. Mason scanned the sky. No drones hovered now, but he knew they would return at dawn. He turned to Corin. "We rest here," he said, pointing to a sheltered hollow beneath a crumbling archway. Corin agreed, her silver eyes softening in relief. Lyra danced ahead, breathless with excitement. Together, they descended into the valley, hope and fear entwined. Beneath the archway, Corin settled on a patch of soft grass. Mason unpacked their rations, dried fruit, flatbread, boiled greens. He placed the food before them, and Corin and Lyra ate hungrily. Mason nibbled at a piece of bread, tasting hope for the first time in weeks. Shadows crept across the valley floor, and the first stars blinked above. Corin traced her finger along the oasis's shore. "By dawn," she said softly, "we reached the water temple." Mason studied her face. On her world, temples were places of healing and sanctuary. He nodded. "We'll reach it together." As they rested, Mason stood watch at the valley's edge. The moon rose behind him, pale and distant. The wind carried the scent of water and jasmine. For a moment, he let himself believe that tomorrow they would find allies, humans or aliens, who would not judge them but welcome them to rebuild together. He looked back at Corin and Lyra, sleeping under the archway, and vowed to protect them with everything he had. Dawn would bring new trials, but also the chance to fulfill Dawn's fragile promise. That compassion could cross any border, and that even in the darkest lands, hope could bloom dawn on the wildlands. The first pale light of morning revealed a vast expanse of scrub and thorny bushes stretching toward distant hills. Mason, Corin, and Lyra stood beside the simple metal border marker, their breaths visible in the cool air. Behind them lay the settlement and its dangers, ahead uncertainty. Corin flexed her ankle carefully, testing the strength of her healed tissue. Mason adjusted the straps of his backpack, which now held bandages, dried rations, and a crude map of uncharted routes. Lyra traced patterns in the dust with her small finger, humming a quiet lullaby from her home world. Together, they took their first steps into the wildlands, where every shadow might conceal threat or salvation. Unforgiving terrain. The scrubland proved relentless. Dry earth cracked underfoot, and the thorn bushes snagged at their clothing. Water was scarce, only a few trickles of muddy stream here and there. Mason led cautiously, using his farming instincts to spot hidden hollows where the ground retained moisture. Corin limped slightly but pressed on, chanting softly under her breath in her native tongue, a ritual to steady her mind and honor her child's safety. Lyra stayed close to Corin's side, picking tiny wild berries that tasted like tangy sweetness. Mason shared his water ration in careful sips, mindful that each drop might mean life or death. As the sun rose higher, heat shimmered across the plains, forcing them to seek the scant shade beneath a lone, gnarled tree. A sudden storm. Without warning, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, swirling in unnatural patterns. A cold wind whipped up dust and leaves, and distant rumbles rolled like an alien drum. Mason frowned. The weather here was usually predictable. Corin's eyes widened. "Storm magic," she whispered, recalling legends of her people who could summon wind to clear skis. But this was different, wild, uncontrolled. He urged them to find shelter, spotting a rocky overhang ahead. They pressed on, hearts pounding as the first cold drops splattered their faces. Lyra clung to Corin's side, her violet eyes wide with fear. Beneath the overhang, they huddled as wind howled, stinging raindrops turned to dust that cut like sand. Mason wrapped his arms around Corin and Lyra, offering warmth and reassurance against the storm's fury. Bonding through adversity. As the storm raged, Mason lit a small fire of gathered twigs and dried grass. The flames danced under the rocky ceiling, shielding them from the wind's worst. Corin produced a small, carved wooden charm, a family heirloom shaped like a spiral galaxy. She handed it to Lyra, who pressed it to her chest and fell asleep almost at once, comforted by the familiar touch. Mason watched them, a knot of emotion tightening in his chest. He realized that their journey was more than survival, it was forging a chosen family. He shared stories of his lost daughter, her favorite toy, the lullabies he'd sung. Corin listened, tears glinting on her cheeks, and for a moment, two cultures met in shared grief and love. Hidden dangers. When the storm passed, the ground was slick with mud and footprints led away from their shelter, not theirs. Mason stiffened, scanning the rocky walls. Corin's hand shot to her shawl, where she concealed a small hunting knife. Tracks, she said, voice tense. Lyra stirred, waking to see Mason's serious face. Mason knelt, brushing mud aside to reveal fresh prints, four-toed, clawed, too large for any human or Corin's kind. They followed the trail cautiously, stepping into a slender canyon where shadows grew long. Each snap of twig underfoot echoed like a warning. Mason gripped his improvised staff, Corin readied her knife, Lyra clutched her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Then a low growl rolled through the canyon. Encounter with the wild. A massive creature emerged, a predator of the wildlands, its fur a mottled gray, eyes amber like embers. It moved with lethal grace, muscles rippling beneath skin. Mason felt a surge of fear. This beast could kill them in a heartbeat. Corin stepped forward, placing herself between Lyra and the creature. She whispered an alien word and the animal hesitated, head tilting as if recognizing her tone. Mason exhaled. Corin slowly lowered her knife, reaching into her pack for a dried meat jerky she'd scavenged earlier. She tossed it near the creature's paws. It sniffed, then devoured the offering. Corin spoke again, soothing, her voice a bridge across species. Within minutes, the beast lay by their side, vigilance still in its gaze but no longer threatening. Mason collapsed, relief flooding him. Lyra stroked the creature's fur as if greeting an old friend. Lessons of trust. With the beast, now named Shard by Lyra, leading the way, the trio resumed their journey. Shard's keen senses alerted them to waterholes and hidden shelters. Each step built trust between human, alien, and wild creature. Mason watched Corin's gentle interactions, her empathy bridging gaps he never imagined possible. He realized that authorities' patrol drones treated aliens as enemies, but here, away from borders, life formed its own alliances. He felt humbled by Corin's courage and softened by Lyra's innocent trust. As evening shadows lengthened, they reached a verdant creek cutting through the scrub, a ribbon of green in the dying land. The Creek of Hope. The creek's water was clear and cool. Mason knelt, cupping his hands to drink first, then offered the water to Corin and Lyra. Corin draped her shawl to scoop water for Shard, whispering gratitude in her tongue. Lyra splashed her face, giggling at the tickle of cold water. Mason filled their canteen and gathered edible roots along the bank. They cooked a simple stew over Shard's protection, sharing warmth and laughter. For the first time, Mason allowed himself to hope. Perhaps beyond these wildlands lay other communities, humans and aliens living without fear. But tomorrow held uncertainty, distance, more patrols, dwindling supplies. Visions in the water. As night fell, Corin sat by the creek's edge, gazing into the dark surface. Mason took a seat beside her. She pointed to faint ripples that glowed violet under moonlight. Visions, she said softly. Corin explained that on her world, water could reflect memories and guide travelers. She placed her hand on the surface and images shimmered, her home world burning under red skis, her people fleeing in starships, Lyra as a newborn. Then a new vision, a distant oasis, towers of white stone rising amid green fields, safe haven for refugees. Mason's heart pounded. Is it real? He whispered. Corin nodded. If water speaks true, it leads us there. They stared at the faint glow, hope warming their souls. Renewed purpose. With Shard resting nearby, Mason and Corin promised each other that come dawn, they would follow the vision's path toward the oasis. Lyra slept in Corin's arms, clutching her talisman. Mason felt a fierce protectiveness stirring within him, a purpose beyond tending dying crops. He would guide this alien family to safety, even if it meant defying orders, betraying old loyalties, or sacrificing his land. For in Corin's eyes, he saw a future where humans and aliens might heal together. As the moon climbed high, they settled on the creek's bank, forging plans by starlight. The trials beyond the border had tested their resolve, but it was trust born in adversity that now carried them forward into the unknown. The morning sun glinted off the crystalline waters of the oasis, painting ripples of gold across its surface. Mason, Corin, and Lyra emerged from the shadowed archway into the verdant valley. Before them stood the water temple, an elegant structure of white stone pillars entwined with vines and flowering blossoms. Its steps descended directly into the lake where clear water lapped in soft whispers. Beside the entrance, carved reliefs depicted humans and aliens standing side by side beneath a shared sky. Mason swallowed hard. Hope and fear warred within him. This place could be their refuge or their undoing. They approached on the smooth stone platform. Corin's limp resolved into a confident stride healed by their journey's trials. Lyra followed, clutching her talisman. Mason kept watch, scanning the tree line and the distant ridge where patrol drones might circle. The valley seemed peaceful now, but he knew vigilance was still required. Greeting by the Guardians. As they reached the temple steps, two figures emerged from an open doorway. A tall human woman in simple white robes, and beside her, a slender alien man whose skin shimmered pale green beneath the light. Both carried staffs topped with carved water symbols. Their eyes, one pair warm brown, the other deep violet, met Corin's and Mason with equal measure of curiosity and authority. The human spoke first, voice calm but firm. "Travelers, state your purpose." Mason stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. "We seek sanctuary," he said. "My name is Mason Riley's. This is Corin and her daughter Lyra. We fled the patrols and danger beyond their reach. We come by vision and need healing, safety, and a chance to rebuild." The alien guardian tilted his head, regarding Corin's silver-streaked hair and the carved patterns on her shawl. "Your journey crossed water's mirror," he observed. "Visions brought you, but sanctuary is earned, not given." The human guardian nodded. "You may enter, but first you must face the water's trial." Corin's face was steady. Lyra hid behind her, peeking out with wide violet eyes. Mason felt his pulse quicken. "What is the trial?" he asked. The human raised her staff, and water from the lake rose in a gentle arc between the guardians, forming a curtain of suspended droplets. "Step through the water's veil," she instructed. "If your hearts are true and your purpose just, you will emerge cleansed and welcomed. If not, the water will reveal your doubts and you shall not pass." Mason exchanged a look with Corin. For a moment he hesitated, fear of unknown consequences gripped him, but Corin's hand closed over his. Together they guided Lyra forward. The three walkers stepped beneath the falling water, its cool touch startling against their skin. Visions of the heart. Inside the water curtain, the world shifted. Droplets suspended midair formed shifting images. Scenes from Corin's past, her home world aflame, her people fleeing in panic. A memory of Lyra's birth, the mother's joy mingled with fear, then Mason's daughter's laughter echoing in the ruined cabin. Mason's breath caught. He saw himself closing his eyes in grief, blaming the world for his loss. He saw the moment he carried Corin into his home, choosing mercy over protocol. Waves of emotion pulsed through him. Guilt, sorrow, compassion, determination. Corin saw visions too. The moment she stole grain from Mason's shed, the terror in her daughter's eyes as they fled, the kindness in Mason's face when he tended her wound. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but she stood firm. Lyra saw her mother's fear and love intertwined. She saw Mason's gentle eyes. She glimpsed the oasis's towers, promise of safety. The water's images faded and the curtain parted. They emerged on the temple floor, water trailing from hair and clothes, hearts pounding. The guardians waited in silence. Finally, the human spoke. "You have passed. The water has seen your truth." The alien guardian inclined his head. "Enter as guests of the temple." Healing and shared waters. Inside, the temple's interior was cool and hushed, lit by skylights above that cast shards of sunlight onto mosaic floors depicting rivers and stars. At the center lay a shallow pool fed by subterranean springs. Mason, Corin, and Lyra approached the water's edge. Steam rose in gentle swirls. The human guardian gestured. "Immerse yourselves," she said, "and let the spring's power heal body and spirit." Mason helped Corin out of her shawl and gently guided her into the pool. The water lapped at her chest, warm and soothing. Corin closed her eyes as the healing currents eased the ache in her leg and washed away the last of infection's sting. Mason entered next, feeling warmth spread through his shoulders and arms, memories of grief softening like morning mist. Lyra slipped in, giggling as the water tickled her skin. After a few minutes, the human guardian sprinkled water mixed with crushed lotus petals over their foreheads, chanting a melody that seemed older than memory. The lotus petals floated atop the surface, releasing a faint violet glow. When the ritual ended, Corin and Mason felt lightness in their limbs and calm in their minds. Lyra sputtered water and splashed happily, free of hunger and fear for a moment. The human guardian spoke softly. "You carry wounds deeper than flesh, but here, water's embrace can mend what is broken if you allow it." Corin bowed her head. "We are grateful," she said. Mason nodded, tears of relief in his eyes. Lyra swam toward them, beaming. Whispers of discord. As they dried by the central hearth, wrapped in fresh white linens, the alien guardian addressed them. Welcome to the sanctuary. You may stay 3 days to rest and learn. After that, you must decide return to the world beyond your borders or remain and join our community. Mason's heart leapt. 3 days of safety, time to plan. Corin and Lyra could heal fully. Yet something unsettled him. He recalled the patrol officer's warning that this would go on record. The sanctuary might shield them from drones, but shared records could reach ears beyond these walls. The human guardian introduced them to other residents, a blend of humans, aliens, and hybrids who tilled temple gardens, taught children, and studied ancient texts. Mason saw friendships blossoming across species lines, laughter mingling in communal kitchens. It was a vision of unity. But in a corner, he noticed a group of stern-faced humans whispering behind their hands, casting curious glances toward Corin's tattoos and Lyra's violet skin. Corin felt their scrutiny too. She pressed Mason's arm. "They watch us," she whispered. Mason placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We stay cautious." Unexpected betrayal. That night Mason could not sleep. He wandered the temple corridors until he reached the scriptorium, a library of vellum scrolls and crystal data orbs. He sought any record of Corin's people, treaties, diplomatic missions, pleas for aid that had gone unanswered. What he found chilled him: encoded dispatches from central authority declaring all refugees as security threats, listing names and descriptions, including Corin and Lyra. Someone here had shared intel. Someone in this sanctuary must have betrayed guests to the patrol. He rushed back to Corin's chamber, finding her seated by the window, Lyra asleep in her arms. He crouched beside her. "They have our records," he said quietly. Corin's eyes widened, sorrow mixing with anger. "We trusted them," she whispered. Mason clenched his fists. "We must leave at dawn, take Lyra and go east beyond the ridge. I will face whoever betrayed us." Corin shook her head. "No, we stand together." Mason's lips pressed in a thin line. "You and Lyra must be safe." "I cannot risk you being captured because of me." Corin's gaze softened. "We are a family now. We face this trial together." Confrontation at first light. At first light, Mason led Corin and Lyra to the courtyard where the guardians stood waiting. Villagers gathered, tension humming in the cool air. The human guardian spoke. "There has been a breach. Central authority demands the surrender of foreign refugees. Their patrols will reach the valley by noon." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Mason stepped forward. "I have been your guest," he addressed the human guardian. "And I vow to protect Corin and Lyra. They have done nothing but seek shelter and healing. If they must leave, I will go with them, but I will not hand them over to fear and prejudice." The alien guardian's violet gaze met Mason's. "Your loyalty honors the sanctuary's sacred code, but you must choose: remain here and face patrol, or depart now into the wild where dangers are many." Villagers pressed in, some urging flight, others arguing for resistance. Corin took Mason's hand. "We go," she said. Lyra appeared at her side, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mason swallowed, drawing strength from their unity. "We leave at once," he declared, voice steady. The human guardian nodded, solemn. "Go with our blessing, carry our hopes for a world where refuge is not a crime." As the trio stepped away, villagers lined the courtyard, offering silent farewells and clasped hands. Mason felt Corin's grip tighten. Together they crossed the threshold, moving eastward toward the rising sun, hearts heavy but unbroken. Behind them, the temple's towers shimmered in morning light, a promise of sanctuary that nearly held, and the memory of kindness that would guide them through the trials ahead. Departure at dawn. The horizon glowed pale gold as Mason, Corin, and Lyra slipped away from the water temple's valley, their hearts heavy with farewell. The guardians watched in silence, offering solemn nods but no escort. Armed only with supplies and each other's strength, they descended the rocky path that led into the burned plains beyond. Corin carried her healed leg with grace, Mason bore Lyra in one arm and the satchel in the other, and Lyra hummed a hopeful tune, her small voice trailing through the dawn air. Behind them, the white pillars of the sanctuary shimmered in the early light, an image of kindness they vowed to carry into the world. The scourged earth. The burned plains stretched for miles, twisted black stumps, ash-laden ground, and the skeletons of once majestic trees. The air tasted of smoke and salt, the result of a wildfire sparked last season. Mason led carefully, scanning for stable footing among ash and sharp charcoal. Corin paused to brush dust from Lyra's boots. "This land remembers fire," she murmured. "Yet life returns." She pointed ahead. Tender green shoots sprouted from cracks in the soil. Mason felt hope flicker. In their journey, they too would rebuild what had been lost. Desert mirage. As the sun climbed, a heat haze rose from the plains, creating ripples that shimmered like water. Lyra pressed her face to the ground, peering into the wavering images. "Water?" she asked, voice bright. Mason squinted. In the distance, a cluster of palm-like trees surrounded by blue glints, an oasis mirage. Corin tightened her grip on Mason's arm. "Mirage," she warned softly. Mason nodded. "We cannot chase what is not there." But the image kept luring them onward. Each time they paused, the trees danced farther away. Exhaustion clawed at their limbs and Corin's face grew pale. Mason offered water from the canteen, but each sip barely cooled his throat. Trial by fire. Suddenly, heat surged as a dust devil spun toward them, a swirling column of grit and embers. Corin shielded Lyra and Mason braced himself, covering both with his coat. They huddled low, coats wrapped around faces to filter grit. The dust devil passed, leaving behind singed grasses and ringing silence. Mason coughed, pulling the coat away. Corin's shawl bore scorch marks, Lyra's hair tangled with ash. Mason studied the landmark trail ahead, a line of charred stones leading eastward. This way, he said, pointing. Those stones mark the old caravan route. Corin nodded, trusting his knowledge. Together, they followed the stone line, each step carrying them farther from sanctuary but closer to safety. A hidden oasis. By late afternoon, their legs ached and water ran low. Just when despair threatened, Corin held up a trembling hand. Through a narrow gap in the charred trees lay a small pool of clear water fed by an underground spring. Around it, lush grass grew in a perfect circle and wildflowers nodded in the breeze. Mason dropped to his knees and drank deeply, filling the canteen. Corin guided Lyra to sip carefully, then knelt to wash her face. As their spirits lifted, Mason gathered flower petals and crushed roots, mixing them into cool water for a makeshift poultice. He applied it to Corin's shin, soothing the lingering ache. Lyra giggled, tossing pebbles into the pool. In that secret haven, exhaustion eased and hope blossomed anew. A shifting loyalties. While they rested, a patrol of mounted settlers thundered past the oasis trail, scanning for trespassers. Mason froze. Corin drew Lyra close. The settlers reined in their horses nearby, eyes narrowing at the trio. One raised a hand to hail them. Mason stepped forward, hands raised. "We are travelers," he called. "We mean no harm." The riders dismounted cautiously. Their leader, a stern man in red scarf, studied Corin's silver-streaked hair and Lyra's violet eyes. Corin met his gaze, silence her shield. After tense moments, the leader motioned to his riders. "Move on," he ordered. "We have no word to give." The patrol mounted and rode away, leaving the oasis tranquil once more. Mason exhaled. "They saw us," he said. Corin nodded, "but chose mercy this time." Mason drew her into a brief embrace. "We must keep moving." Storm and shelter. Threats behind them, they pressed east. Late evening brought thunder on the horizon and fat raindrops that turned dust to mud. Corin guided Mason to a collapsed stone wall, a remnant of an ancient irrigation channel. Beneath its arch, they sheltered, fire crackling between slick stones. Mason boiled water for stew, and Corin draped her shawl over Lyra to keep her warm. They spoke in whispers. Corin shared tales of her childhood, of starlit dances on her world. Mason recounted the day he first discovered life beyond his fields. Lyra listened, eyes heavy with sleep. The rain pattered overhead, cocooning them in a quiet lullaby. Exhaustion finally claimed them, and they slept side by side, safe for a night. Vow beneath starlight. When they awoke, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and the ground sparkling with raindrops. The sky stretched overhead, a canvas of stars unmarred by patrol drone lights. Mason extended his hand to Corin, and she took it, fingers cold but firm. Lyra held onto Corin's other hand, small and trusting. Mason lifted them both close. "We have crossed fire and drought," he said softly. "We will cross more yet, but together we will find that whitestone city of hope." Corin pressed her cheek to his shoulder. Lyra yawned and snuggled closer. Behind them, the desert opened eastward, a land of sand dunes, rocky crags, and the promise of the city seen in Corin's vision. Under the vast night sky, they set forth again, bound by love and the vow to protect each other, no matter what trials lay ahead.